Hi everyone, and welcome back to the British Accent Podcast, your space to grow more confident, fluent, and natural in English, one conversation at a time. I'm Emma.
And I'm James. Today's episode is super important because it's about how to ask questions politely in English. Whether you're speaking to a teacher, your boss, a colleague, or even someone new you've just met, how you ask something can totally change how your message is received.
Absolutely. In many English-speaking cultures, politeness plays a big role in communication. A direct question like, "Where is the bathroom?" might sound fine to you, but in a formal or unfamiliar setting, it can come off as a bit abrupt. Instead, we might say, "Excuse me, could you please tell me where the bathroom is?" See how much softer and more respectful that sounds.
Exactly. So today, we'll walk you through some polite question structures, tone tips, and vocabulary that will help you sound respectful, without sounding unsure or too shy. You'll learn how to balance confidence with kindness.
And we'll also talk about intonation, how your voice rises and falls, because even if the words are polite, the way you say them matters just as much. Sounding too flat can seem cold, while rising too high can make you sound overly hesitant. There's a sweet spot we'll help you find.
We'll cover everything from everyday situations, like asking for directions or help in a shop, to workplace scenarios, like asking your manager for feedback or requesting clarification during a meeting. Let's jump into the practical stuff now, and start with one of the most useful polite phrases, "Would you mind if?"
Yes. Would you mind if? Is such a great way to soften a request or ask a favor. For example, instead of saying, "Can I borrow your pen?" you could say, "Would you mind if I borrowed your pen?" It's polite, respectful, and it shows that you're considering the other person's feelings or space.
Exactly. And another one I love is, "Do you happen to know?" This phrase is great when you're asking someone for information, especially a stranger. Like instead of saying, "Where's the nearest pharmacy?" you can say, "Do you happen to know where the nearest pharmacy is?" It adds a gentle, friendly touch.
Yes, and here's a fun one. For example, could you possibly help me carry this? It sounds really polite, and it works well both in professional and casual situations. And if you want to make it even more polite, you can add "please" at the end.
Right. And let's not forget about intonation. In English, when we ask polite questions, our tone often rises slightly at the end of the sentence, but not too much. If your pitch goes too high, it might sound unsure, and if it's too flat, it might sound too direct. Try practicing with a slight, natural rise in your tone to show openness and respect.
That's such a good point. Politeness is not just about the words, it's about how you say them. So try to keep your tone soft and relaxed, and smile if you're face-to-face. Even over the phone, people can often hear a smile in your voice.
Here's another tip: sometimes, adding a short phrase before the question helps a lot. For example, "Excuse me, I was wondering. Sorry to bother you, but would it be okay if I asked?" These little introductions prepare the listener and make your question feel more thoughtful.
And they're especially helpful in professional environments. Imagine you're in a meeting and you don't understand something. Instead of just saying, "What does that mean?" you could say, "Sorry to interrupt, but could you explain what that means?" It shows you're engaged, but also respectful of everyone's time and space.
So true. And when asking for help, a simple "Would you mind helping me with this?" is way more polite than "Help me with this." Even adding "please" can completely change the tone, so never underestimate the power of that one little word.
Also, if you ever feel like you ask something too directly, don't panic. You can always follow up with a quick, "Sorry if that was too direct," or "I hope that didn't sound rude." Native speakers do this all the time to soften the mood if needed.
Exactly. It's more about intention and effort than perfection. If you're trying to be polite and open, people will usually respond positively, even if your grammar or vocabulary isn't perfect yet.
We've also got some bonus expressions for polite follow-ups. For example, "Thanks so much, I really appreciate it. That was very kind of you. I'm grateful for your time." These leave a great impression after you've asked something.
Those follow-up phrases really go a long way. And if you're in a situation where someone says no to your request, don't take it personally. Just respond with something like, "No worries at all," or "I understand, thank you anyway." It shows maturity, respect, and keeps the interaction positive.
Yes, being polite also means being understanding, especially when things don't go your way. It keeps the conversation flowing and shows emotional intelligence, which is just as important as language fluency in real-life communication.
Absolutely. You know, Emma, one thing I always recommend to learners is to listen closely to how native speakers ask questions in TV shows, interviews, or podcasts. Notice the words they use and how they say them. It's a great way to absorb the rhythm and natural tone of polite English.
That's such a smart habit. You can even pause and repeat the phrase out loud, almost like shadowing. For instance, if you hear someone say, "Excuse me, would you happen to know what time it is?" Try repeating it out loud with the same intonation. It helps train your mouth and ears together.
And don't be afraid to write these down. Keep a little list of polite phrases and questions on your phone or in a notebook. That way, the next time you're in a cafe, a classroom, or even just texting someone in English, you've got something to fall back on.
Also, remember, in English-speaking cultures, being polite doesn't mean being weak. In fact, it's often a sign of strength, confidence, and professionalism. Asking things with respect makes people more willing to help or engage with you.
Couldn't agree more. And with practice, these polite structures will start to feel natural. Soon, you won't even have to think about how to be polite. It'll just become a part of how you speak English confidently and smoothly.
Let's give listeners a few more examples they can use in different everyday situations. Like, if you're in a store and you need help, you can say, "Excuse me, could you help me find this item?" Or, "Hi, would you mind showing me where the checkout is?" That kind of structure is soft, friendly, and respectful.
Yes. And if you're in a meeting or classroom and want to contribute without interrupting, you could say, "Sorry to interrupt, but may I add something?" Or, "Could I just share a quick thought?" These kinds of phrases help you sound both confident and polite, two powerful communication traits.
And don't forget about email or written communication. Even in texts or work messages, using phrases like, "Would you be able to?" or "I was wondering if," can make your tone feel more professional and courteous.
Definitely. Let's take another context, asking for clarification. Instead of just saying, "What do you mean?" which might sound a bit blunt, you could say, "Could you clarify that for me?" or, "Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Would you mind explaining again?"
That's a great point. Softening the tone really changes the entire feel of the conversation. It makes people more open and willing to engage with you, and it also helps avoid misunderstandings, especially if you're still working on your fluency.
And one last thing, always smile when you're speaking. Your tone of voice, body language, and facial expressions all work together with your words to help you come across as warm, respectful, and confident.
Yes. That non-verbal communication part is huge. Even if your grammar isn't perfect, if you speak with a friendly tone and relaxed body language, people will usually respond positively. A smile, a gentle nod, an open posture all say, "I'm friendly, I want to connect," even before the words come out.
Exactly. And when you combine those nonverbal cues with polite language, you create a powerful first impression. It's not about sounding overly formal, it's about being thoughtful with how you speak. For example, instead of jumping into a request with, "I need this," you can say, "Would it be possible to," or, "When you have a moment, could you?"
And don't worry about overthinking it. These phrases will start to feel natural the more you hear and use them. Watching English movies, listening to podcasts like this one, or observing native speakers in conversation, can really help you pick up on these polite expressions.
That's why it's good to keep a little phrasebook or list in your phone of polite ways to ask questions or respond. You can even practice them aloud, just like actors rehearsing their lines. It's about getting your brain and mouth used to working together in English.
Oh, I love that. Rehearsing like an actor is such a smart tip. You're not just memorizing words, you're building a rhythm and confidence in how you speak. So when the moment comes in real life, you're not stuck searching for the right phrase, it just flows naturally.
Totally. And let's not forget how important tone of voice is. You can say the exact same words, but the tone makes all the difference. Like, could you help me, said with a nervous or unsure tone might sound hesitant, but the same phrase with a steady and friendly tone comes across as confident and respectful.
Yes. That's why practicing intonation is just as important as vocabulary or grammar. Try saying polite questions with different tones in front of a mirror or recording yourself. You'll start to notice what sounds natural and what doesn't. It can be a game changer for sounding more fluent and polite.
And here's something else, we often worry about sounding too formal or too casual. But honestly, in most everyday situations, a simple, "Excuse me, may I ask," or "Sorry to bother you," but works perfectly. It's polite without being too stiff.
Right? And even if you do make a small mistake, most people will appreciate the effort you're putting in to be polite. In fact, they'll often help you or even compliment you for trying. So don't be afraid to speak. Just use those magic words, please, thank you, excuse me, may I, and would you mind, and you'll be just fine.
Absolutely. The more you practice using polite English in real conversations, whether it's at work, in a cafe, or even online, the more natural and confident you'll feel.
Another great tip is to use indirect questions. They are super useful when you want to sound extra polite. For example, instead of saying, "Where is the bathroom?" you could say, "Could you tell me where the bathroom is?" It's a small change, but it sounds much softer and more respectful.
Exactly. And the cool part is, native speakers use these all the time. It's part of what makes conversations flow smoothly. Like, instead of asking, "What time does the meeting start?" try saying, "Do you happen to know what time the meeting starts?" It feels more conversational and polite at the same time.
Totally agree, James. And speaking of tone, intonation plays a big role too. If you raise your pitch slightly at the end of your question, it often sounds more friendly and curious rather than demanding. For instance, saying, "Would you mind helping me with this?" with a warm tone sounds way better than saying it flatly or too quickly.
That's such an underrated tip. Sometimes learners focus so much on the words that they forget about posture, tone, and facial expressions. But those things make a huge difference in how your message is received, especially when you're trying to sound polite and confident.
Totally agree, James. And speaking of tone, intonation plays a big role too. If you raise your pitch slightly at the end of your question, it often sounds more friendly and curious rather than demanding. For instance, saying, "Would you mind helping me with this?" with a warm tone sounds way better than saying it flatly or too quickly.
Right. A lot of learners don't realize that the way you say something in English can change everything. You could be using the most polite words, but if your tone is too sharp or rushed, it might still come off as rude. Practicing polite intonation is just as important as learning the right phrases.
And if you're not sure how your tone sounds, record yourself. Seriously, it helps. Play it back and ask yourself, would I feel comfortable if someone asked me this way? If not, tweak your delivery until it feels right. It's a game changer.
Another useful trick is adding softening phrases like, "just, a bit," or "maybe." So instead of saying, "Can you explain this?" you could say, "Can you just explain this part a bit more?" That slight adjustment makes you sound more approachable and less direct.
Exactly. Softening your language doesn't mean you're unsure. It actually shows emotional intelligence and respect. It's like building a small bridge before you ask for something. And trust me, people appreciate that effort.
Absolutely, Emma. And here's another practical phrase: I was wondering if. It's such a gentle way to begin a question. For example, I was wondering if you could explain this section again. It sounds much more polite than just asking directly, especially in formal or professional settings.
Yes, that's a great one. It's subtle but super effective. And if you're in a more casual situation, something like, "Hey, do you happen to know," works really well. For instance, "Hey, do you happen to know where the nearest station is?" It keeps the tone friendly and non-intrusive.
And for learners worried about being too hesitant, don't be. Politeness doesn't equal weakness. In English-speaking cultures, being polite is often seen as a sign of strength, maturity, and self-awareness. It helps create smoother communication, especially with strangers or in workplace conversations.
That's true. And here's another pro tip: smile while speaking. It might sound funny, but your tone actually changes when you smile. It naturally adds warmth and friendliness to your voice. People can hear that even over the phone or through a video call.
So true. Even if your grammar isn't perfect, the way you ask something can win people over. Politeness builds trust, and trust leads to better conversations.
Right? And let's not forget about intonation. The way your voice rises and falls can completely change how your question sounds. For example, if you say, "You're coming with us," with a rising tone at the end, it becomes a friendly confirmation question. But if your tone is flat or sharp, it might sound impatient, or even rude, totally unintentional, but it happens.
That's such an important point. Practicing your tone can make a world of difference. One tip I always give is, try recording yourself asking questions in different ways. Listen back and ask yourself, do I sound polite? Do I sound confident? This kind of self-awareness helps you adjust and improve faster.
Exactly. And if you're ever unsure, you can always soften your request with a quick phrase like, "Would it be okay if?" Or, "If it's not too much trouble." These little expressions go a long way in showing respect, especially in more formal situations.
Plus, it helps when you really listen to how native speakers do it, whether it's in movies, interviews, or podcasts. You'll pick up on natural patterns. Like how they use pauses, soften their tone, or add friendly fillers like, "you know," or "I mean," to keep the question light and approachable.
Definitely. And remember, sounding polite isn't just about the words, it's also about timing. Don't interrupt, wait for a natural pause, and then speak up. That shows you're considerate, and people really appreciate that.
And I'd also say, don't be afraid to clarify. If you're worried that your question might come off as too direct, you can always follow it up with a softener like, "I hope that's okay to ask," or "I just wanted to make sure I understood." That shows humility and openness, which helps build rapport.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect, it's about being thoughtful. Even native speakers sometimes stumble with how they phrase things, but showing that you care about being respectful really sets the tone for good communication.
Here's another trick: try using indirect questions when you want to be especially polite. Instead of asking, "Where is the restroom?" you can say, "Could you tell me where the restroom is?" That small shift makes your question feel more gentle and refined.
Yes. And if you're in a workplace or formal setting, those kinds of phrasing patterns are super useful. It's like adding a professional polish to your English. Plus, people usually respond more positively when you ask in a polite, thoughtful way.
Another subtle but powerful technique is mirroring. If someone you're talking to uses polite language or a specific structure, try reflecting that same tone. It makes conversation smoother and shows you're in tune with the flow of communication.
Totally. And sometimes, just adding a smile to your voice, whether you're speaking face to face or even on a phone call, can make your questions sound warmer and more engaging. It's not just about the words, but the whole vibe you're giving off.
So true. And if you're nervous, remind yourself, it's okay. Asking questions is how we learn, connect, and grow. Being polite doesn't mean you have to be timid, it's about showing respect while still being confident in your own voice.
Yes, and speaking of confidence, tone really plays a big role. Sometimes it's not what you say, but how you say it. You can ask the exact same question in two different tones and get very different reactions. A calm, steady tone says, "I'm confident," but also respectful, and people pick up on that instantly.
Definitely. Let's talk about workplace English for a second. When you're in a professional setting, it's important to show both respect and initiative. For example, instead of saying, "I don't understand this," you can say, "Would you mind explaining this part again?" Or, "Could you walk me through this section?" That way, you show you're engaged, not just confused.
Right, because being polite doesn't mean being passive. In fact, asking clear, well-phrased questions shows you're paying attention and that you care about doing things right. Managers love that.
Here's a neat little tip: use the "I was wondering" strategy. Like, "I was wondering if you could give me more details about the project." It sounds super natural and polite. Plus, it gives the other person room to respond without pressure.
And don't forget the magic words, "please," "thank you," "excuse me." They never go out of style. You'd be surprised how far a simple "would you mind" or "could I trouble you for" can go in making your English sound thoughtful and kind.
Another common situation is asking for clarification. Maybe you didn't catch something someone said, or you're unsure about a direction. You can say, "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Or, "Do you mind saying that again a bit more slowly?" That's much better than pretending you understood and ending up confused.
Exactly. And remember, learning how to ask questions politely isn't just about sounding nice. It's about building trust, showing respect, and connecting with others in a more meaningful way. Whether you're in the classroom, at work, or just chatting with someone new, your words matter, and the way you use them can make all the difference.
Absolutely. So keep practicing those polite phrases, focus on your tone, and don't be afraid to ask. Every time you speak, you're building your confidence, fluency, and connection with others. And that's what communication is all about.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the British Accent Podcast. We hope today's episode gave you practical tips you can use right away. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep speaking.
See you next time, everyone.